June 17, 1944, 0847 hours, 17 kilometers southeast of Saint-Lay, Normandy. The morning fog clings to the hedgerows like a funeral shroud. Oberst Heinrich Müller crouches behind the stone wall of a farmhouse, his fingers trembling as he lights a cigarette. Around him, the survivors of Panzergrenadier Regiment 902 huddle in silence, their eyes scanning the Norman sky with the hollow dread of men who've learned to fear what flies above them. The grinding rumble of Tiger tanks echoes from the sunken road to the west. 8 tons of Krupp steel and 88mm Fury that once made the Wehrmacht invincible. Now they sit motionless, commanders refusing to advance into open ground. Müller knows why. Every soldier knows why. The radio crackles with frantic warnings from forward observers. Jabos inbound, bearing 270, multiple contacts. Jabos, fighter bombers, but not the nimble British Typhoons or the graceful American Mustangs. Something else. Something that makes hardened panzer crews abandon their tanks and sprint for the tree line. German 7th Army After Action Report, June 1944. The sound reaches them first. Not the high whine of a Messerschmitt or the smooth purr of a Spitfire, but a deep, guttural roar that seems to vibrate the earth itself. 8 cylinders, 1800 horsepower, for tons of American rage wrapped in riveted aluminum and wrapped again in steel plating, thick enough to laugh at flak. The P-47 Thunderbolt, die jug, the Americans call it short for juggernaut, but the Germans have another name, whispered in field hospitals and scrawled in letters home that censors never catch, Himmelshenker, the sky executioner. Some just call it what it is, the flying nightmare. They come in low, 6 of them, flying line abreast at 300 miles per hour. Müller sees them emerge from the fog bank like prehistoric monsters materializing from smoke. Their wings are thick, almost stubbing nothing like the elegant lines of European fighters. These aircraft look brutish, industrial, designed by men who built tractors and locomotives, not by aviation poets. Each plane carries 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns, 4 in each wing, synchronized to converge at 300 yards. That's 400 rounds per second, per plane. The math is simple and merciless. 6 aircraft equals 2,400 rounds pouring from the sky every second. But today they carry something else beneath those wings, something that makes. The machine guns seem gentle. 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, 10 per aircraft. 60 in total. Each warhead packed with 40 pounds of Composition B explosive. US 8th Air Force Mission Report, 437th, June 1944. The lead Thunderbolt banks slightly, the pilot adjusting his angle of attack. Inside that cramped cockpit sits Lieutenant James, Red Hartley of the 406th Fighter Group, a farm boy from Iowa who 3 years ago was driving combines through cornfields and now commands a machine that costs more than every house on his street combined. His hands rest easy on the stick. The P-47 is stable, forgiving, built to absorb punishment and keep flying. The engine before him is a Pratt & Whitney Art 2800 double Wasp, a radial masterpiece that generates more power than an entire locomotive. 18 cylinders arranged in 2 rows, cooled by ram air, forced through ducting by the plane's speed. The engineering team at Pratt & Whitney in Hartford, Connecticut, had created something revolutionary. An engine that could take catastrophic damage and continue running. Cylinders could be shot away, oil lines could rupture, coolant could drain. The R-800 would cough, shudder, and keep turning technical manual and 0147 RRR doors. Yitian Zhou by Sen. Below, Müller watches the formation split. 3 aircraft peel, left toward the tank column. 3 dive toward his position. He presses himself against cold stone, knowing it will mean nothing. The rockets leave their rails with a whoosh that drowns out everything else, sound like dragons breathing fire. The first volley strikes 200 meters short, geysers of Norman earth erupting skyward. The second volley is perfect. The stone wall to Müller's right simply ceases to exist, replaced by an expanding sphere of orange flame and black smoke. The concussion wave lifts him bodily and slams him back down. His ears ring. Blood streams from his nose. When he opens his eyes, the world is sideways. Where 18 men had been crouching 30 seconds ago, there is now a crater deep enough to hide a Kubelwagen, but the rockets are just the overture. The machine guns open up with a sound that defies description or chainsaw ripping through sheet metal multiplied by 8. A sustained roar that seems to physically compress the air. The .50 caliber M2 Browning is an American icon, designed by John Moses Browning himself, and refined by engineers at Colt's Patent Firearms Manufacturing Company in Hartford. Each gun fires armor-piercing incendiary rounds at 850 rounds per minute. At this range, those rounds punch through the Tiger's side armor like it's cardboard. Müller watches a tank erupt in flames as tracer rounds find the ammunition storage. The turret lifts off its ring and tumbles end over end across the field. Bund Desertov, Panzer Commander's Diary, June 1944. Hartley pulls up at 500 feet, feeling the G-forces compress him into his seat. The P-47 groans but responds instantly, climbing away from the flak bursts now peppering the sky behind him. This is what separates the Thunderbolt from every other fighter bomber in the European theater. It can take this punishment. The fuselage is semi-monocoque construction, built by Republic Aviation in Farmingdale, Long Island, using techniques borrowed from bridge engineering. The cockpit sits behind the massive engine, with the pilot protected by armor plate, bulletproof glass, and sheer distance from any incoming fire. German pilots call it unfair. American pilots call it staying alive. U.S. Strategic Air Force's Intelligence Report, May 1944. The Luftwaffe had prepared for many things in this war. They'd trained to dogfight Spitfires, to intercept B-17 formations, to strafe Soviet armor columns, but they had no doctrine for the P-47 in its ground attack role. It flew too fast to intercept at low altitude. It carried too much ordnance to be dismissed as harassment. It absorbed too much damage to be reliably shot down. And there were so many of them. Republic Aviation's factories in Long Island and Evansville, Indiana, were producing 15 Thunderbolts every single day. A mechanical avalanche of American industrial might that Germany could not match, could not even comprehend War Production Board statistics. June 1944, Müller lies in the crater, surrounded by the dead and dying, and watches the 6 aircraft circle back for another pass. They have fuel for 30 more minutes. They have ammunition for 3 more strafing runs. They have rockets for 1 more devastating volley. And behind them, already inbound, radar stations on the English coast are vectoring in 12 more P-47s from the 365th Fighter Group. And behind those, another formation, and another, an endless chain of flying nightmares, each one flown by a pilot who'd been a farmhand or a factory worker or college student 2 years ago, now transformed into instruments of mechanized apocalypse. The question burning in Müller's mind, the question haunting every German commander from Normandy to the Rhine, not whether the P-47 can be stopped. It's simpler and more terrifying than that. How did the Americans build something we cannot kill? The answer lies not in the summer skies over Normandy, but in a series of desperate decisions made 3 years earlier in offices and factories, scattered across the American industrial heartland, where engineers armed with slide rules and blueprints confronted an impossible mandate: build a fighter that could escort bombers deep into Hitler's Europe and return home through storms of flak and cannon fire that shredded every other aircraft the Allies possessed. February 1941, Republic Aviation Corporation, Farmingdale, Long Island. Alexander Kartvelli sits at his drafting table, staring at specifications that make no sense. The U.S. Army Air Corps wants a fighter with 8 machine guns, armor protection for the pilot, self-sealing fuel tanks, a supercharged engine for high-altitude performance, and combat radius exceeding 500 miles. They want all this in an airframe that can somehow still maneuver with Messerschmitt, Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf, FW-190s. Every calculation Kartvelli runs tells him the same thing. These requirements produce an aircraft so heavy it should not fly. His initial design weighs 12,500 pounds, nearly twice the weight of a Spitfire. His colleagues call it a flying brick. The British liaison officer who reviews the mock-up laughs and suggests the Republic stick to building trainers Republic Aviation. Internal Memorandum, March 1941. Kartvelli makes a radical decision. Stop fighting the weight. Embrace it. If the aircraft must be heavy, make that weight into armor, make it into firepower, make it into fuel capacity, and most critically, make it into an engine so powerful that weight becomes irrelevant. He partners with Pratt and Whitney's engineering division, and together they integrate the R2800 double Wasp engine so large that the cockpit must be positioned behind it, 11 feet back from the propeller. This creates an accidental defensive advantage no one predicted. The massive engine block becomes a shield, absorbing machine gun and cannon fire that would kill pilots in other aircraft. The turbocharger sits in the belly, fed by ducting that runs through the fuselage and other inadvertent defense layer. To shoot the pilot, you must first destroy 18 cylinders of hardened steel, 12 feet of ducting, and multiple armor plates. German pilots will discover this the hard way. Technical Manual and 0147 RRR-DOS. Section 4, 1943. The prototype flies in May 1941. It handles like a truck, but it flies. More importantly, it survives. Test pilots shoot up the airframe with ground-based guns, simulating combat damage. The P-47 absorbs punishment that would down 3 Messerschmitts. Republic receives a production contract for 171 aircraft. By June 1944, that number has exploded to 12,602 Thunderbolts rolling off assembly lines in Long Island and Evansville, each one costing $83,000, cheap by fighter standards. Expensive enough that every airframe represents a small-town annual budget. The workers building them are largely women, their husbands and brothers overseas, their hands riveting together the machines that will bring those men home. Rosie the Riveter is not propaganda. She is real, and she is building Thunderbolt's War Production Board Manufacturing Report, WPB-47, 1944. But the P-47's true revolutionary advantage emerges not from its construction, but from what the Americans install inside it. The SCR-522 radio system, designed by engineers at the Army Signal Corps laboratories in Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. Previous aircraft radios were temperamental nightmares, limited range, constant static, prone to failure under G-forces or altitude changes. The SCR-522 operates on VHF frequencies between 100 and 156 MHz, with 4 crystal-controlled channels that allow instant communication between aircraft, ground controllers, and forward air observers. Range, 100 miles under optimal conditions. Clarity, good enough to coordinate complex attacks in real time. Reliability, the vacuum tube design, ruggedized by Western Electric engineers, functions even after the aircraft takes battle-damaged signal cores. Technical Manual TM11-611, 1943, closing parenthesis. This transforms the P-47 from a fighter into a node in a network. American fighter bombers do not hunt blindly. They receive precise target coordinates from forward observers equipped with matching radio sets. They coordinate attacks with artillery batteries, timing their strafing runs to coincide with barrage patterns. They warn each other of flak positions, enemy fighters, weather hazards. The Germans, operating with shorter-range radios and overtaxed communication networks, cannot comprehend how American pilots seem to know everything, see everything, coordinate with inhuman precision. The answer is electromagnetic. While German pilots shout into crackling microphones and receive garbled responses, American pilots conduct aerial warfare like a conference call. US 8th Air Force Tactical Communications Study. July 1944. July 4, 1944. 15:34 hours. The Falaise-Archancon corridor. Normandy. Hauptmann Werner Henschel commands what remains of Panzergrenadier Division's 901st Regiment 17 tanks, down from 96 at the start of the invasion. They're attempting a daylight withdrawal through the narrow corridor between Falaise and Archentan, a bottleneck where 2 armies are trying to escape before the Allied noose closes completely. Henschel knows the danger. Everyone knows. But the orders are explicit. Withdraw now or be encircled. They move out at 1500 hours. Tanks spaced 50 meters apart. Commanders scanning the sky with binoculars. German 7th Army War Diary. July 1944. The P-47s arrive at 1534. 16 aircraft from the 513th Fighter Squadron. But they do not simply attack. First, for aircraft orbit at 4,000 feet, serving as top cover against any Luftwaffe interference that will never come. German Air Force is down to fumes and desperation. 4 more aircraft swing wide, positioning themselves to intercept any tanks that attempt to reverse course. The remaining 8 split into 2 flights of 4, approaching from perpendicular angles. This is not improvisation. This is doctrine, rehearsed at training bases in England, refined through 2 years of combat, transmitted via radio in calm, professional voices. Blue leader to blue flight. Target, armor column, bearing 185. Attack pattern, delta. Rockets first, then guns. Watch for flak at coordinates Quib 7, 406th Fighter Group Combat Report. July 4, 1944. The attack unfolds with mechanical precision. The first flight releases 40 rockets at 1,200 yards. Henschel watches the sky fill with smoke trails, watches his Panthers explode like fireworks. The second flight attacks 30 seconds later from the opposite direction, catching the survivors as they attempt to scatter. Then the machine guns, that apocalyptic roar that seems to last forever, but actually only spans 18 seconds per pass. 18 seconds of 3,200 rounds, impacting across 200 meters of road. Armor-piercing, incendiary ammunition, each round capable of penetrating 30 millimeters of steel at 500 yards. Panther tanks have 20 millimeters of top armor. The math is simple and final. Henschel's tank dies when a rocket strikes the engine deck, igniting the fuel tanks. He escapes through the cupola hatch, drops to the road, and sprints for a drainage ditch. Behind him, the Falaise corridor has become a graveyard. 187 tanks destroyed in 6 hours. Not by other tanks or anti-tank guns, but by aircraft that cost less than the Tigers they're killing. The tank crews who survive will be interviewed by American intelligence officers 3 weeks later, and their testimony will be uniform. They feared the P-47 more than any weapon in the Allied arsenal. "We could fight tanks," one commander states. "We could dig in against artillery. But against the Jabos, we could only die or run," as First Army Intelligence Summary. July 1944, dramatized composite. The kill ratio tells the story with brutal clarity. P-47s, operating in the fighter bomber, roll destroy an average of 1.7 German tanks per aircraft lost. At the Falaise Gap, that ratio climbs to 4.2 to 1. The P-47 losers are primarily two concentrated flak, takes multiple 88mm or 37mm direct hits to bring down a Thunderbolt, and even then, 67% of pilots survive and return to Allied lines. The aircraft's massive radial engine can run with 4 cylinders destroyed. The self-sealing fuel tanks designed by engineers at US Rubber Company, using layers of vulcanized rubber that swell when exposed to gasoline, prevent catastrophic fires. Pilots limp home in aircraft so shot up that ground crews cannot believe they flew, yet the P-47 absorbs the damage and delivers its pilot to the runway. 8th Air Force Aircraft Loss Analysis. August 1944. The Germans attempt countermeasures. Flak batteries increase around every crossroad and bridge. Tanks travel only at night or in heavy fog. Panzer commanders requisition camouflage nets and paint schemes designed to blend with Norman hedgerows. Nothing works. The P-47s hunt with radar vectors, with forward observer coordinates, with pilot reports, transmitted instantly across the network. When weather grounds them, American artillery takes over, guided by the same communication systems. The Wehrmacht is fighting an enemy that can see through clouds, cordon across 50 miles, and respond to changing battlefield conditions faster than orders can travel through German command chains. German 7th Army After Action Analysis. August 1944. In captured documents, German intelligence officers expressed disbelief that borders on despair. The enemy fighter bomber force operates with a coordination and efficiency that suggests either complete air superiority or communication systems far superior to our own. Most likely both. Countermeasures unknown. Morale impact. Severe Bundesearch of Oberst Intelligence Summary. July 1944. What the Germans cannot see. What no amount of signals intelligence reveals is the depth of American industrial commitment behind each P-47. For every Thunderbolt over Normandy, there are 3 more in England undergoing maintenance, 2 in transit across the Atlantic, and for rolling off production lines in Indiana and New York. Behind each pilot are 6 months of training, 300 hours of flight time, and simulator practice. That includes coordinated attack patterns, radio procedures, and damage assessment. Behind each radio system are factories in New Jersey producing 1,000 units monthly. Behind each rocket are production lines at Chrysler and General Motors retooled from automobile manufacturing. staffed by workers who understand they're building the instruments that will win the war, one smoking Tiger tank at a time. By August 1944, P-47 Thunderbolts have flown 546,000 combat sorties in the European theatre. They've destroyed 3,752 enemy aircraft in aerial combat, but unremarkable number. But in ground attack operations, the numbers become staggering. 86,000 railway cars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armored vehicles, 68,000 trucks. These are not estimates. These are confirmed kills, verified by gun camera footage and ground reconnaissance. The P-47 is not merely winning air superiority. It is dismantling the German army's ability to move, supply, or reinforce. It is erasing the Wehrmacht from the battlefield, one strafing run at a time. U.S. Strategic Air Force's statistical summary. August 1944. And the pilots keep coming. Farm boys and factory workers and college dropouts who learned to fly in Texas and Arizona, who crossed the Atlantic on converted freighters, who now orbit over France in 4-ton machines, built by riveter women in Long Island, coordinated by radio technology from New Jersey, powered by engines from Connecticut, armed with guns from Hartford and rockets from Detroit, the industrial might of an entire continent compressed into a single aircraft, flown by men who had returned to ordinary lives after the war, but who, for this moment, have become something the Germans have no name for, no defense against, no answer to. The flying nightmare is not coming. It is already here, and it is everywhere. The psychological impact arrives before the bombs do. By August 1944, German soldiers across the Western Front have developed what military psychiatrists will later classify as Jabu's condition, characterized by constant scanning of the sky, involuntary flinching at engine sounds, and refusal to move during daylight hours. Field hospitals report soldiers suffering symptoms identical to shell shock, but the cause is not artillery. It is anticipation, the certain knowledge that at any moment the sky might split open and rain fire. One Wehrmacht doctor writes in his journal, "The men do not fear death. They fear the helplessness of death from above, against which courage and training mean nothing." German Medical Corps report. August 1944, dramatized composite. The fear is justified by mathematics. In the 3 months following D-Day, P-47 Thunderbolts fly an average of 1,200 sorties per day over France. Not in total per day, that's 50 sorties every hour, daylight permitting. One aircraft overhead somewhere in the American sector every 72 seconds. 4 German forces attempting to maneuver, resupply, or retreat. This creates a phenomenon military analysts call battlefield transparency. The enemy can see everything, strike everything, destroy everything that moves. Panzer Commander Otto Carius, an ace with 150 tank kills to his credit, will later write, "We learned to fear the weather report more than enemy armor. Clear skies meant death. We prayed for clouds like civilians pray for rain." Otto Carius. Tigers in the Mud, 1992. The strategic implications cascade beyond individual battles. The German army in France operates on a logistics system designed for European rail networks, supply depots near major rail junctions, transport organized around predictable schedules, fuel and ammunition flowing through established corridors. The P-47 systematically demolishes this system. Locomotives become primary targets. Rail yards transform into twisted metal graveyards. When the Germans shift to road transport, the Thunderbolts switch to truck columns, and the kill rate actually increases. Trucks cannot withstand .50 caliber fire the way rail cars can. By September 1944, German logistics officers calculate that 73% of supplies shipped toward the front never arrive, not captured, not diverted, simply destroyed from the air before reaching their destination. German Army Group B Logistics Summary. September 1944. This creates shortages that ripple through every aspect of Wehrmacht operations. Panzer divisions sit immobile for lack of fuel. Artillery batteries ration shells, 210 per gun per day. Infantry units receive half rations. Medical supplies dwindle until field hospitals run out of morphine and perform amputations without anesthesia. Meanwhile, across the lines, American forces operate with logistical abundance that seems impossible to German prisoner soldiers who discard half-empty ration cans. artillery batteries that fire preparatory barrages, consuming more shells in 30 minutes than an entire German division possesses. The material imbalance is so extreme that captured German officers initially refused to believe the numbers, assuming they're being shown fabricated intelligence designed to break morale. First Army interrogation reports. August-September 1944. But the P-47's impact extends beyond destruction of material. It enables the American doctrine of rapid, armored advance that characterizes Patton's Third Army drive across France. Traditional military wisdom holds that advancing armies must pause periodically to allow supplies to catch up, to consolidate positions, to prepare for counterattacks. Patton never pauses because he doesn't need to. His tank columns advance with P-47s flying continuous cover overhead, destroying any German force attempting to establish defensive lines. His supply trucks move in daylight, unmolested, because the Luftwaffe has been swept from the sky. When German forces mass for counterattacks, forward air controllers riding in jeeps, just behind the front lines, equipped with SCR-5-2 radios, identical to those in the aircraft, transmit coordinates directly to orbiting Thunderbolts. Response time from target identification to first bombs on target, 11 minutes average. The Wehrmacht cannot concentrate forces, cannot establish defensive positions, cannot counterattack. The P-47 has not just achieved air superiority, it has weaponized air superiority into a system that makes traditional ground warfare obsolete. Third Army after-action report. August 1944. The human element sustaining this mechanical hurricane rarely appears in the dramatic accounts, but it determines everything. At airfields across southern England and northern France, ground crews work 20-hour shifts, maintaining the Thunderbolt fleet. Each aircraft requires 4 hours of maintenance for every hour of flight time. Engines must be inspected, oil changed, ammunition loaded, rockets mounted, radios tested, battle damage repaired. A single P-47 Squadron 6-day aircraft requires 184 ground personnel, mechanics, armorers, radio technicians, ordnance specialists, fuel handlers. These are the invisible soldiers who determine whether the aircraft flies or sits grounded. When a pilot returns with a shot-up engine, mechanics work through the night, pulling cylinders, replacing piston heads, bleeding hydraulic lines, testing magnetos, because that aircraft must fly again at dawn. The pilot gets the medals. The mechanics get 12-hour shifts in freezing rain, knuckles bleeding from stripped bolts, hands scarred from hot metal, eyes burning from hydraulic fluid. Without them, the P-47 is just an expensive sculpture. 8th Air Force Maintenance Command Report. September 1944. The same invisible army exists stateside, in the factories that must sustain production, even as quality workers get drafted. Republic Aviation's Farmingdale plant employs 23,000 people by 1944, 70% of them women, many working their first industrial job. They rivet fuselage panels, install hydraulic systems, wire electrical components, mount guns, test engines. Quality control is obsessive. Every rivet inspected, every wire tested, every system verified, because the workers know these aircraft will be flown by someone's son, someone's husband, someone's brother. The production pace is relentless. One complete P-47 every 94 minutes, 24 hours per day, 7 days per week. When a bomber carrying P-47 parts crashes in the Atlantic, the production schedule doesn't change. Emergency orders go to suppliers. Workers volunteer overtime. The assembly line never stops. This is industrial warfare at its apex. Entire cities retooled to produce a single weapon system. Hundreds of thousands of workers synchronized to the same objective. Economic power translated directly into battlefield dominance. War Production Board Final Report. 1945. The cost in human terms extends beyond the factory floor. P-47 pilots face mortality rates that would seem sustainable compared to bomber crews. Approximately 8% losses per 100 missions, but the psychological burden differs in character. Bomber crews fear being hit. Fighter pilots fear running out of sky. Every strafing run against defended targets means descending into a cone of flak, where a single 37mm shell can end your life. The P-47 can survive the hit, but physics still applies. Direct hit to the cockpit, strike to the control surfaces, lucky shot through the armor gap. Pilots develop superstitions, lucky scarves, particular boots, pre-flight rituals. They watched friends burn in aircraft that should be invincible but aren't. They returned to bases where their buddy's cat is already being stripped. Footlocker packed, personal effects boxed for shipment home. Then they fly again the next morning because the mission board says so. Because the ground controller has targets. Because German tanks are still moving somewhere in France. The nickname The Flying Nightmare cuts both ways. 8th Air Force Psychiatric Survey. October 1944. The German perspective shifts from fear to resignation by autumn. After the Falaise Gap, after the Seine crossings, after the liberation of Paris, Wehrmacht veterans stop looking at the P-47 as a weapon and start viewing it as a force of nature like weather or terrain, something to endure rather than defeat. In November, American intelligence officers interview a captured panzer commander who states, "We developed tactics for everything, against Russian T-34s, against British Shermans, against American tank destroyers, but against the Jabos, there are no tactics, only prayers, and those stopped working in July the 7th, Corps Intelligence Report." November 1944, dramatized composite. This psychological collapse manifests in battlefield behavior that borders on paralysis. German units refuse to occupy positions near crossroads or bridges known P-47 hunting grounds. Commanders schedule all movements for night hours, even when tactical situations demand daylight maneuver. Entire divisions surrender when surrounded, rather than attempt breakout operations that would expose them to air attack. The Wehrmacht is not being defeated by superior tactics or better tanks. It is being psychologically dismantled by an enemy that strikes from an element they cannot contest, with a frequency they cannot predict, with results they cannot survive. The P-47's legacy solidifies in the war's final months and extends deep into the post-war world. The lessons learned over France become doctrine that shapes Cold War military thinking. Air superiority is not an advantage but a prerequisite. Close air support requires dedicated aircraft, dedicated training, and dedicated communication networks. The psychological impact of air power can equal its physical destruction. When the U.S. Air Force becomes independent in 1947, it builds its tactical air command around principles proven by P-47 operations forward air controllers, radio coordination, fighter bombers designed to survive ground fire. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, entering service in 1976, carries the name as homage, along with the same design philosophy, armor, firepower, survivability. Air Force Historical Research Agency, Tactical Air Doctrine Development, 1947 to 1960. The engineering innovations pioneered in the P-47 program ripple through post-war aviation. The turbo supercharger integration influences jet engine placement. The armor protection philosophy shapes attack helicopter design. The radio systems developed for aircraft-to-ground coordination evolve into the digital communication networks, enabling network-centric warfare in Desert Storm, Afghanistan, Iraq. The fundamental insight that air power is most effective when seamlessly integrated with ground operations through real-time communication becomes the cornerstone of modern combined arms doctrine. The P-47 did not just win battles in France. It wrote the manual for how industrialized nations fight wars. Joint Chiefs of Staff. Joint Publication 329. 3. Close Air Support. 2014. But perhaps the most enduring legacy exists in the memories of those who fought beneath its wings. Decades after the war, infantry veterans still remember the sound of R-2800 engines approaching when their positions were being overrun, the relief of seeing those stubby wings and fat fuselages materializing from clouds, the knowledge that help was seconds away. Eisenhower will write in his memoirs that the P-47 was one of the 4 weapons that won the war in Europe, alongside the C-47 transport, the Jeep, and the atomic bomb. That assessment places an attack aircraft in the same category as weapons that redefined human conflictor recognition that air power, properly applied, does not merely support ground operations but fundamentally transforms them. Dwight D. Eisenhower. Crusade in Europe, 1948. On a rainy morning in November 1945, at Republic Aviation's Farmingdale plant, the last P-47 Thunderbolt rolls off the production line, number 15686. Workers gather for photographs, many crying, some holding pictures of sons or husbands who flew the aircraft they built. The war is over. The contracts are cancelled. The factories will retool for civilian production refrigerators, automobiles, the peaceful machinery of prosperity. But for 43 months, this plant, and others like it across America, produced the weapon system that broke the Wehrmacht's back, that turned the tide in France, that transformed young men from Iowa and Texas and California into the instruments of strategic dominance. The flying nightmare taxis to the end of the runway, engines rumbling one final time. The test pilot, a veteran with 200 combat missions, advances the throttle, feeling 1,800 horses surge beneath the cowling. The massive fighter accelerates, impossibly heavy, defying aerodynamics through sheer brute force. At 90 knots, it rotates. At 110, it climbs. And within seconds it disappears into the November overcast, carrying with it the legacy of American industrial might, engineering innovation, and strategic vision compressed into 4 tons of riveted aluminum and steel. Somewhere over the Atlantic, a Luftwaffe veteran sits in a displaced persons camp, waiting for repatriation, staring at clouds and remembering the sound. He flinches without meaning to. He will flinch at that sound, any radial engine, any deep-throated roar, for the rest of his life. The flying nightmare has landed. The war is over. But some fears outlive the battles that created them. In the end, the P-47 Thunderbolt proved a simple truth that every military force since has tried to replicate. Wars are won, not by the bravest soldiers or the boldest tactics, but by the side that can strike everywhere, see everything, and sustain the effort longer than the enemy can endure. The Germans called it a nightmare because nightmares cannot be fought, cannot be reasoned with, cannot be escaped. You can only survive them or succumb to them. The Thunderbolt gave them no third option.